Good? Okay. All right, hello. My name is Andrew SEGA. In the demo scene, I'm known as Necros, and I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about tracking, which maybe some of you, I see some seniors and I see some non-seniors. Some of you may know, some of you may not. The demo scene basically involves three components. There's code, which is typically how programmers push the envelope. There's art, which is how artists push the envelope. And then there's music. And the demo scene has a very specific type of music, which we tend to call tracking. It was invented around 1987, and it sort of has become the de facto way you make music these days in the demo scene. Pretty much every single demo that exists on the PC specifically, and also on Amigas, uses tracked music. Even, believe it or not, things like 4K intros where you wouldn't think it'd be possible to actually fit music into something of that size. One of the big benefits of tracking also is that it's very self-contained. There's no reliance on sound generators, long MP3 files, WAV files, that sort of thing. And so it's a really unique form of music, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about sort of where it came from and what you can do with it today in a professional sense. But first, we'll do a little bit of history. In 1982, there was the Commodore 64, which was a brilliant piece of machinery. And it had one of the first sound chips called the SID, which allowed you to actually do more than PC speaker beeping or Tandy 1000 sort of primitive chirping. And as we went through the years, there was the Amiga, there was ad-lib synthesis, multi-channel PC sound cards, advanced formats, and then nowadays you can pretty much do whatever you want. Stream MP3s, play multiple MP3s at once, compress to your heart's content. But to understand what tracking is and why you'd want to do things this way, I want to talk a little bit about sort of the history of the audio chip and what it can do. The Commodore 64 had this lovely device called the SID. And really, I forget, the guy who invented it was from a prominent music company. I wish I could remember, actually. I just blanked. But it had 3 oscillators and 4 waveforms. It had things like ADSR, which is attack, decay, sustain. Basically, a note can sort of come on and fade out. It had an actual filter where you can sort of change the frequency of a sound. These are all things that were way ahead of the time for any sort of hardware. The songs had to, unfortunately, be programmed at a very low level because the Commodore 64 had no real high-level interface, like, say, a direct sound, and there was no support for samples. Your waveforms were all very simple. And to give you a taste of that, I'm going to play some Commodore 64 music. This first one is the sort of exhibits a very characteristic sound. This is the Pitfall 2 soundtrack. Very exciting. You can just make that go mono, by the way, if it's not coming out of both sides. This one is Rob Hubbard's Dragon's Lair 2. And then a little bit of Rob Hubbard's Skate or Die, which is one of the first Commodore 64 tracks to attempt to try to play something that resembled a sample. Very old school indeed. That guitar is ridiculously grainy because it was at a sample rate of like thousands of samples per second. And so it had limited realism. The waveforms were stock. It had a sort of a beep and a different beep. It had a noise oscillator, which could basically go. That's about it. And there was barely enough CPU to play back anything, much less a sample. As you heard, Skate or Die tried it at a really low rate. It sounds kind of like a guitar. People were, ooh. Then came this beautiful beast, the Amiga 1000. The Amiga 1000 had something very special. It had an audio chip which could play back samples in hardware. At the time, in 1985, this was unheard of. And it had, the hardware supported 4 playback channels, 8-bit samples, approximately 29 kilohertz. There was some weird issues with vertical sync and such, which affected the sample rate. But in general, it sounded great. And so this was also at the time where the demo scene was approaching sort of as maybe you saw in Phoenix's talk, approaching some level of maturity, and people saw this audio hardware and said, hey, we need to really make some music on this. Thus, the first ever tracker. Carson Obarski, 1987, created something called Soundtracker. It was also the first to use something called the mod format, which was basically note, sample, some effects that you could do sort of per channel. And it looked like that, and it had very simple editing capabilities. And it was sort of the first tool that you could actually use the Amiga to its full potential. And so people, all of a sudden, the demo scene embraced this, and we had some really interesting music coming out. As you will compare to the Commodore 64 stuff, here's some Amiga jams. This would be Space Debris from 1991. I forget what demo this was in. Maybe someone can remind me. Trickster. Was it not? I could have sworn this was in some Amiga demo. Okay. So you can hear it sounds like kind of real instruments. Here's another example, Heat Beats Accordion People, featuring even more sort of a realistic sound. And for 1991, this was amazing. If you think what was on the PC around 91, there was basically ad-lib and beeping. And people who had Amigas could actually play stuff like this. Here's also another example of my favorite mod in the world, Dizzy's Banana Split. Which really sounds pretty awesome considering it is only literally 4 channels. Only 4 things can play at any one time. So, I guess I'll speak a little bit about what a tracker actually is. A tracker basically just means putting sounds into tracks. So the tracker is the editor. It's a very efficient sort of way to use the hardware of, say, something like an Amiga, which has a hardware sample playback. You just typed in notes, and it'd say C, A flat, and the octave number. Had a very low memory overhead, and for demo, it's perfect because the average file size of these songs was on the order of, hundreds of K. In the early days, perhaps 50 to 100 K. Later on, perhaps 500 K to a meg. But really efficient, didn't affect download sizes of productions. And so people really latched onto it. There are many flavors. As I showed you, the Ultimate Soundtracker was the first, but soon came the clones, Pro Tracker, Fast Tracker, Octamed, 669, Composer, Scream Tracker, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What? Yeah, all sorts of good stuff. But they all basically operated the same way. You had samples, which were the sound files that got played. There were the channels, which mapped directly to the hardware and played samples. There was effects, which I'll talk a little bit more later, but they are basically per channel things you could do to change the sound, usually change the volume of a sound, pitch bend something, offset into a sample, and do various things. And then there was the pattern, which is basically how you organize the song as a whole. Unfortunately, the editors pretty much still look like this. This was Pro Tracker 3, 1992. And what you can kind of see here is 4 tracks. We have note row. This is sort of all compressed, but you had, these are essentially effects data where it'd be an effects number and then a value. Again, I don't know why they love hexadecimal so much, perhaps because hexadecimal fits into 2 characters and avoids that nasty 3-character problem with numbers over 100. But musicians ate it up, perhaps because in these days, musicians, or pretty much anybody involved in the demo scene, had to have some sort of programming knowledge. Otherwise, you just couldn't get these productions done. And so, really, it's simpler than it looks. If you break down what you saw right there as the sort of combinations of rows, you can take 1 row at a time and look at it. It's just the row number, the note, which is in that case the C-4. C is the note, 4 is the octave. You also have the sample number, say 12. Samples are just a linear list. And then you have an effect. In this case, OA is the effect, which in this case would be, say, a volume slide. And then 4 is the parameter, which, if I remember correctly, in the olden days, that would be like volume slide down by an amount of 4. And then basically to play back, the thing just went tick, 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 processed each row and And there was your music. It's pretty awesome. You had lots of effects. You could set volumes. You could slide up and down, sample offset, pattern break. And this one little interesting thing called arpeggiate, which I'll spend a moment talking about because arpeggiate is to play a chord really fast. So if you wanted to say have C, do, 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 arpeggiate would be this really freaking fast. And it gave a very characteristic sound. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, it spawned what we now know as chiptune. And the chiptune was an evil beast that loved to arpeggiate and had a very characteristic video gamey sound. Here's some chiptunes. What you're hearing in the background, that sort of like blipping song is, arpeggiation, where you play a lot of notes really fast. It sounded like a chord, and also allows you to sort of use your limited number of channels to get a fuller sound without having the memory of actually having actual chord samples. Here's another chiptune. They all kind of sound the same after a while. No offense to any of the Game Boy people in the house. It's almost like you could have a genre chip music. Well, I mean, it's already been covered. Little girl from Ipanema. So, cute stuff. But we don't want to stay in the past. Luckily, people can actually do more realistic sounding stuff, even in 4 channels like the Amiga. For example, here's a little track from Dizzy, using real guitar samples. Still a tiny mod. This is like a 200, 300K mod. 8-bit samples, low sample rate. Pretty good. And then a dude named Yogi Little Ante with this little jam, featuring actual guitar strumming, harmonics, flutes. What? Yeah. And for the time, people were amazed you could actually have this kind of music come out of a relatively early Amiga. But then we had to evolve. And so came along the PC. Unfortunately, the PC didn't have that nifty sound chip that the Amiga had, and so it couldn't play back any samples in hardware, but it did have more CPU. This meant, theoretically, you were not constrained to any sort of channel limit, sample limit. It's whatever you could get the machine to do. At the time, the state of the art was the horrible, horrible ad-lib sound chip, which was based on every game in those days. FM synthesis, no samples. It was truly terrible. So people decided to go ahead and track it to the PC. And when they did that, they said, why limit yourself to 4 channels? Especially when this thing came out. This would be the glorious Gravis ultrasound. In 1992, some dude said, hey, how about let's take a PC card that plays sounds in hardware, and let's target it towards demo sceners and give away 5,000 copies of the card to demo scene parties and try to get this thing adopted. And it was pretty awesome. It could play up to 32 channels, 14 channels at full 44.1 CD sample rate. And it was instantly adopted into every single tracker of the time. Unfortunately, it never sold well because the gaming industry didn't want to adopt it. They were so tied to ad-lib, they were so tied to FM, they'd have to rewrite all their music, all their composers, all the playback routines, and basically very few games ever sort of latched on and the thing sort of died an ignominious death. I'm sure one day these cards will go on eBay for a lot of money. I think, Jim, you've got, what, like 10 of them or something? This also led to some better formats. We got Screen Tracker 3 from the famous Future Crew in 1993. This was a 16-channel tracker. Fast Tracker 2, similar kind of a program with actual 16-bit samples and mouse support. This is before the Windows days, really. And then later on, we get more modern things like Impulse Tracker, which supported 64 channels, virtual channels where you could actually cram multiple overlapping notes into a single channel, all just limited by how powerful your CPU was. And so with the PC came PC scene music. And also, you saw some games actually start to use the tracker format for the first time. And I'm going to play you some PC examples. I had to listen to a wave, but this to be a purple motion track from 1993. S3M, this would be, I think, 14 channel. You sort of just notice the increased density of sounds, increased density of amounts of sample data. And now I'll play a track from the 1994 video game from Origin, Crusader No Regret, which I did some of the soundtrack for. And this was one of the first games that supported 8-channel mods. The producer at the time was a big metal fan. He insisted that every song have deaf guitars in it. It made me very sad. But, you know, sound quality-wise, you know, it's much improved over the ad-lib of its day. Skip ahead. Here's a S3M by Basshead from '95, featuring even more sort of modern sound. And then I'll do another one of my tracks. This is actually a 21-channel IT. We still only get one side? All right, well. Oh, well. Just crank it up then. And pan it mono. So as you can kind of hear, things start to get a whole lot more realistic really fast. There are other games that used mods as well. Star Control 2 back in '92. Malcolm of KLF did a whole bunch of mods for that. Those were 4-channel, I believe, or were they 6-channel? 4. Unreal Tournament used mods, quite a few from different people. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. The CD-ROM appeared. People decided, oh, we can just stream Redbook. That'll do it. This thing named DirectX came along. Oh, we can mix in software. You don't have to deal with sound card, from sound card APIs. And then this little format called the MP3, which unfortunately negated a lot of the size advantage of the track files. You know, a 500K mod versus an average minute per meg MP3 all of a sudden isn't so impressive. So here we are 15 years later. This would be Cubase SX. People enter, as you can see down here, this is a piano roll style interface, which is what most modern music composition programs use. You can actually manipulate samples directly, complicated mixing doodads, a professional like sort of jog shuttle. And you can ask yourself, well, why do people still would ever want to care about tracking? Well, as it turns out, there are some interesting things you can do in a tracker that you can't do in a program like this. And sort of the whole point of this talk is I'm going to show you a little bit in sort of a live demonstration. Tracker files do have advantages. They're not just the demo scene. They're tiny files. They play samples. They can sound realistic. They're multi-channel. And basically, you enter data in sort of a step-sequenced form, where basically every row is sort of a slice of time, and you enter notes, and they sort of play sequentially. And they're still being used to this day on a lot of systems, such as like the Game Boy Advance, where you have limited hardware, and it's just sort of a perfect format to take advantage of. There's also sort of tracking's mutant little children, ModPlug, Renoise. I think Andy showed a Renoise screenshot in his presentation. Revisit, which is basically Impulse Tracker as a virtual instrument you can sort of drop into Cubase, as weird as that sounds. And then my favorite, which is Buzz, which is what I'm actually going to sort of show you. Buzz is a weird beast. It sort of combines tracker-style composition methods with hierarchical effects, VSTs, 24-bit audio, and sort of a real professional sort of sounding package, or at least as, you know, as professional as someone who's not a major software corporation is going to get. And so I'm now going to attempt in mono, I guess, from the left side, load buzz, and do some tracking. Let's see if this works. Not exceeding. Okay. What I'm going to do is start with a very simple example, which should look very familiar. This is a one-channel tracker, exactly the same as trackers back in the day. It has rows, columns, notes go on the left, WAV file numbers, effects, all the old school goodness. And it can also be multi-channel. You just add channels. It has samples. Let's see if I play some samples. Some sort of bass. This is a very sort of simple set. And so you just enter notes. So I'll say start with a kick drum. Notes are entered downwards, which may seem weird at first until you realize that everything sort of plays downward. So what you're seeing is this sort of line. As the line's tracking, that's the rows it's sort of scanning, and it's playing whatever note is on this line. So this is basically saying every 4 ticks, play a bass kick on track 0. So this is kind of boring. I'll add a clap. Simple enough. I'll add a hi-hat. So pretty cool, not exactly rocket science. But what we can also do is sort of add, for example, this channel is volume. We can say change the volume of the hi-hat. Instead of having this monotone hi-hat, we can change the volume dynamically. As you can now hear, it sort of modulates. You got to open a hi-hat, add a little open a hi-hat. This is essentially how you would track back in the day. It's exactly like this if you're using Pro Tracker, Impulse Tracker, Scream Tracker, Octamed, or anything back in the day. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all you could do. And in the demo scene, you would basically make, basically a very long version of this with lots of samples and however many tracks you could do, and that would be it. But Buzz is a little more interesting because, as you'll see when I go to this screen, here's my tracker. And it's sort of just one instance of multiple things I can have going on. This box right here in the center represents the master output. So when I sort of connect the tracker to it, this indicates that the signal flows from this M track, which is a tracker called Matilda tracker, to the master. And then I have in my order list, this is my sort of channel, the channel that's sort of assigned to M track. So as it sort of plays, this scan line sort of, I'll turn the looping off for a second and just make some more. This is my song, and as it's going down, it's basically just playing this pattern. This 0, 0 that you see is basically pattern 0 of M track. And so it's just playing it over and over again. Let's say you wanted to have another pattern, sort of a breakdown of some sort. You would just simply go and stick it here. When it gets to the 1, something different will happen. But here's the cool thing. You can go and make another tracker. Put it over here, connect it to the output. Here's my new tracker. Looks exactly the same. I can give it some channels. I can find a bass line. Put some bass notes. Add my bass line. So what you essentially have is 2 trackers playing at the same time with perfect MIDI synchronization. Tick accurate. You can mute one. You can say just delete the pattern if you want to have like a little breakdown. Bring the drums back, etc., etc. In the olden days, you'd have to actually put all the instruments for all the tracks go into one tracker, so it just channels and channels and channels of stuff. Another cool little thing you can do in Buzz is add effects. This pink box that I have here is an effect. Anything that's blue generates audio, and anything that's pink essentially processes audio. So what I have here is a simple sort of echo sort of delay unit. I'm going to go set some parameters, and I'm going to basically, this is my bass line. This is my drums. I'm going to go and stick the delay in the middle of the bass. What's that? Oh, because this is I'm using the wrong here. I'll do it the right way. I was using the mono delay instead of the stereo delay. And now we'll go. Change some parameters. So what you essentially have here is a tracker that's being routed through effects. These effects right now that I'm using are all sort of built-in effects to Buzz. Buzz has a large library, large community which develops to the Buzz API and has millions and millions of effects that you can sort of just place. I mean, you can sort of see there's choruses, delays, mods, phasers, pitch shifters, all sorts of goodies. But if you don't like the Buzz stuff, you can use something more professional. You can use what's called a VST. VST is essentially a plugin API that's used by sort of modern audio plugins in sort of the high-dollar, real sort of music industry to do effects and virtual instruments and things like that. So I can take a tracker, connect it to, say, something like this, which is like a 4-band filter bank. Maybe automate it. So as you can see, stuff starts to get kind of pro. Let me load something a little more sophisticated. Oh wait, it's going to get way worse than this. So here's a song. This is, as you can see, this is essentially 8 tracks, and it's pretty long. Since everything scrolls down, you can see it kind of goes down. There's pages and pages and pages and pages of stuff. But once everything's kind of rolling. Each one of these blue things, again, is a tracker or some sort of sound generator. All these pink things are effects. You can get some pretty, sophisticated results. And like I said, in the traditional sequencer, modifying a song can be a real pain in the ass. But here, let's say I wanted to, just do large-scale cut and paste operations. I can just go and grab stuff and paste it around, and I actually want, instead of like this, whatever this is, I wanted it to be something different. I can use some different pattern. So it's something different. So the basic gist here is that you can start to create stuff that sounds pretty damn professional, and you can create it in an interface which is extremely fast. Another example. Ooh, what I wanted. So here's another example. You can also do crazy things like this. As you see kind of what's going on here, there's effects which are going into other effects and then kind of coming back together and being piped into other effects. And you can create very interesting sort of signal routing chains. The one thing you can't do is make them recursive, unfortunately, because that would probably cause more problems than solve as everything would feedback and be madness. Raw drums. They're just samples. Where are the drums running through? So they're running through For example, here, this is a tube head on this side of the signal path. This is like a drive, for example. To age. This is sort of built-in buzz effects. So pretty full scope. This is only using 6 tracks. And the interesting thing, if I go, this is a 3 gig laptop, but this is using a 3% CPU. So, very surprised. I mean, I guess people are doing very similar things. I'm surprised no one's actually run Buzz in like a 64K intro, because you could do some real interesting things. I'll show you something else that's even stranger. So I can go, as I said, VST professional effects. There's also VST instruments. So here's one called FM7, which looks very much like the Yamaha DX7. And it can make lots of, let's get a little more gain. And you can sequence it basically like a tracker. I'm gonna throw a compressor on here because it's only got so much volume. Okay. Look, it's our mega demo. So as you see, I've entered the note data in a tracker-style form, but the actual instrument is the software synthesizer. So I can change to a different patch. You know, what have you. And so the note data is basically internally being output as MIDI. So you get your tracker-style friendly interface, only in a modern, 21st century virtual instrument. Yeah. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to sit down for this one. I'm going to get serious. Well, so the main thing about, reload my old example. And so the main benefit of all this is what I consider just pure raw, unadulterated speed. The time it would take you to, in Cubase, go load a bunch of VSTs, load a piano roll, get a MIDI keyboard, start playing some notes, quantize the notes, say, oh, I messed up B, okay, and redo it, move things around. In a tracker, you could practically make an entire song. So let me just make some stuff real quick. I got some, go back to those simple samples. There's the drums. Where's our little bass? Make another tracker. Get our little cheesy bass line. I guess we'll make it in C. Now I'll go and pull up that VST I had up earlier. With my crappy rave lead sound. Oh, this is not going to be good, it's just going to be real cheesy. I'll happily let you use this in your 1982 style Commodore 64 demo, free of charge if you want to when this is done. Just kidding. Okay. So I've now got the FM7, I've put a delay effect on it. I've now put in a little bit of a compressor, just get some volume. Okay, and then add a pad of some sort, perhaps. So let's say I want something dreamy. What do we got? Just kind of making this up. That'll work. Oh yeah, nice and cheesy. So I go and cool thing about Buzz, patterns don't always have to be the same length. I've been predominantly using 16 length patterns, 64. What this means is when sort of these ones will play a 16. As you see, this is 0, 16, 32, 48. These are all 16 length patterns. So I have to keep typing 0 to replay the pattern over again. This one is 64, which is this entire space long, basically. So I can go and enter notes, for a while, and basically just saves me from having to like make individual things. I'll make some cheesy chords. Oh, that clicking is not going to work. So now you have some cheesy song, and now you want to make it into an actual sort of listenable thing. You just block copy. You're like, okay, we'll make the drums come in first. I'll label these for your presentation convenience. So drums first, then you can bring in the bass. Then you'll have some sort of a breakdown where you'll bring in the crappy lead. Maybe you'll bring in the pad at the same time. I'm not even listening to this because I can sort of, it's all sort of visually, you can see it laid out in front of you. And then we need the crappy drum sort of fill before we bring back crappy sounds. So we'll go and do my, we'll go and change the volume just to have it not sound that terribly crappy. And look, we got a song. You got some drums, you can sort of, this will be the part where it's like, now presenting at Nauticon 2007, our fantastic demo, greets and shit. And then there'd be like, here comes our crappy drum build-up. Yeah. Truly terrible. But in general, it's a really amazing sort of way to sort of enter music. And short on time. At this point, I guess I'm just going to sort of open it up to any questions that anybody has.
What is the status of Buzz?
Buzz. So the dude lost the source code in a hard drive crash. It was the guy, Oskari Tamlin. He was in a demo group called Jescola. And yeah, he lost the source code. There's still a large library, a large amount of people making machines for it, of which there are in the hundreds. Machines, synthesizers, effects that sort of plug into this architecture. And people have also gotten it to support VSTs and things. And so development continues, even though the original app is pretty much not going to change. There are many clones being developed, some better than others. I believe there's actually a semi-officially sanctioned one, which is people are trying to basically recreate Buzz so that development can continue. But I mean, I've used it on real albums that have been released like for 5 years now, and it works, you know, and you can make stuff that's sort of every bit as professional as anything else out there, especially the legions of people that use Fruity Loops or use Reason or use sort of more, I don't want to say non-professional, but more lower feature set tools. And so I hope that maybe someday that someone will clone it and can expand on it, and because for me, just the benefit of the tracker interface combined with modern sounding hardware and effects cannot be beat, especially since you can make a tune in about a minute and a half. Questions, anybody else? Yes, Jim.
Source code's lost, so you can't modify it, but if it was the source code you could modify it, what would you like to see Buzz change? I mean, what would you like to see added to Buzz?
pretty flexible as is.
It's pretty. I mean, it's definitely very usable as is. You could argue that certain things like renoise have much more of a sort of a pretty GUI and have more actual sample level editing abilities. But at that point, they basically are turning into Pro Tools or Cubase, and it sort of lose the charm of what it is, which is a glorified meta tracker, if you will, a tracker of trackers. Again, I've often when I first heard the lost source code, I was actually kind of almost gonna try to write one myself, but I realized that'd be pretty foolish. The actual application itself is not that complicated. It's the plugins that are complicated, and people have written a lot of great stuff for the architectures of standard sort of DLL API that people can write to. So, anything else?
Can it automate those VSTs?
Yes, I'll show you that real quick. I was meaning to do that. Where's my crappy lead? So let's say I want to go and I'll put a VST on this. What do I got? It's my laptop, so I'm not always entirely sure of what's on here. Make life easy. Here's a filter. Looks kind of like that. And I'm just going to go and make a pattern for the filter, because why track instruments when you could track effects? So now I'm tracking the filter. I'm going to go and just randomly change it between different presets, basically. And so now it kind of sounds like this. So hopefully it doesn't crash. I'm just changing presets sort of in a tracker, which is controlling the VST, which is an effect another tracker is going through. So in short, yes, any parameter of anything can be automated because you just basically make a tracker for it.
Can the parameters change smooth enough on some values, or do you need to?
Yes, the latest VST wrapper. The latest VST wrapper has you can specify how it interpolates in between ticks, so it's pretty smooth, yeah. And if you want more ticks, you just up the BPM and you get more ticks. So if there's nothing else, I guess that's it. Thank you guys for coming out, and that's tracking for you. Thank you.
Check. And also, just a reminder to everybody, we do have all the DVDs from the conference available outside, so if you're interested, come and see me. Thank you.